I'm calling to order this hearing or roundtable of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, September 30th, 2021. The time is 1:14 in the afternoon, and this hearing or roundtable is being conducted virtually, live via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform, live on the DC Council website, and it may also be live on the chairman's website, which is www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. Again, www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. Already mentioned, it's being broadcast on Council Channel 13, and it will be recorded and available to the public through the Council's website as well. The subject of this hearing is speeding electrification of WMATA's bus fleet. I'm going to read from the hearing notice. The Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority's target date for electrifying its fleet is 2045, over 2 decades away. While WMATA has plans to launch a 2-year pilot project with 12 electric buses and facilities for charging, it is unclear why WMATA is not being more aggressive in its electrification efforts. The purpose of this roundtable is to examine the difficulties and potential challenges in speeding the electrification of WMATA's bus fleet. This hearing will gather testimony from experts on how WMATA could set a more aggressive goal for electrification and get more EV buses on the road. Specifically, the hearing will address life cycle costs for electric buses, bus range, charging infrastructure, funding opportunities, and the experience of other agencies and jurisdictions with substantial electric fleets. The record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. That is, the record will close at 5 p.m. on October 11th of this month. Earlier this year, the council, I believe all members of the council, co-introduced a resolution, a sense of the council resolution PR 24-154, calling on WMATA to move more quickly to electrify its buses. What we have seen in recent decades is that in terms of greenhouse gases, that the major contributor in this country has shifted from electric power generating plants to the transportation sector. And to be sure, public transit systems are a major component and an important component of our transportation sector. We are seeing that there is a move toward electrifying the DC circulator, which is exclusive to the district. The question is why Metro is moving so slowly. So that's what we will be examining with this hearing. This hearing is not so much about why electric buses are good, although there'll be some testimony there, but rather why WMATA is not moving more quickly. And we will see a number of benefits. I see some colleagues, as I look at Councilmember Janice Lewis-George, I know that an issue that's important to one of her Ward 4 neighborhoods is the bus garage or bus barn. And it would have far less impact if it was electrified. And the same could be said for the bus barn or garage that's in Ward 3, Councilmember Chase Ward. Those are just some benefits. With that, let me turn to colleagues and see if they have opening statements, and then I'll turn to witnesses. Witnesses were invited, so we have a small number of witnesses, 8, and we'll get to them in a moment. Councilmember Che, I believe you were first to arrive.
I think Councilmember Janice Lewis-George may have been ahead of me.
Well, then I'll turn to her first.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for holding today's roundtable and to our witnesses for making time to speak with us today. Last week, as you may know, WMATA announced plans for the Northern Bus Garage to be its first all-electric bus garage, meaning it will have the equipment and infrastructure in place when it reopens later this decade to support zero-emission vehicles. This is a great first step of providing cleaner, reliable public transit and greater sustainability in our community. I'm proud that Ward 4 will be home to this facility and support WMATA's efforts to modernize its fleet through the adoption of zero-emission buses. I must say, however, that I'm greatly disappointed that WMATA backtracked from their initial announcement and did so without any acknowledgement of the change. They first said that the facility would open with a mix of battery electric and diesel electric hybrid vehicles, which would have been a good first step. Unfortunately, later that day, they changed the press release to say the facility would open with a mix of current Metro bus fleet and new battery electric vehicles. This means the Northern Bus Garage may open with a significant number of diesel buses, and because Metro has set 2045 for its target to reach fully electric buses, they could be there for many years. This is a residential neighborhood. There are environmental and health impacts at stake with this decision. We all know diesel buses emit dangerous particulate matter. That is perplexing to me and to 16th Street Heights neighbors, because when this facility opens 4 or 5 years from now, only 20% of WMATA's bus fleet will be diesel-only buses, even under its own slow transition timeline. So it's entirely reasonable and feasible to commit to not bringing those buses into our dense residential community and what WMATA proudly plans to have become its first all-electric bus facility. We also need a much faster transition to electric buses. We cannot wait until 2045. Mr. Chairman, I hope we can work together and with our regional partners to push WMATA to be bolder in its goals. We have to recognize the urgent existential threat and climate change that climate change poses, and we can't waste any more time. Other cities, including Los Angeles, are doing better. They're planning to be zero emission by 2030. Why can't we do that too? So I have some questions I'd like WMATA to answer about this process. And although they're not testifying today, I plan to reach out to them directly for more clarity on all of this, but I'm hoping some of the witnesses today will shed light and give a prefer to those answers that I expect from WMATA. And those include, when the Northern Bus Garage reopens, how many of its buses will be electric, hybrid, or fully diesel? WMATA wouldn't share a number at last week's meeting with the community. Why can't the Northern Bus Garage open with all hybrid or zero emission vehicles? What is the timeline for transitioning buses at the Northern Bus Garage to fully electric? And why are we continuing to purchase diesel buses through 2029? Can't we set an earlier target than 2030 for shifting to electric bus procurement? Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'll be in and out of today's roundtable because of some other commitments, but appreciate you holding today's commitment and look forward to further work on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Che.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this important roundtable so that we can examine the difficulties and the challenges in speeding electrification of the WMATA bus fleet. As you mentioned in the introduction, WMATA currently plans to have all electric buses by 2045. This is just too long, just too long. It's unacceptable. We see the realities of climate change every day, from fires to floods to unhoused residents dying from exposure to heat. It's just 2045 is too long in the face of this. And
there was, a meaningful uptick in.
Somebody needs to mute.
And the contribution of gas, the use of gasoline-powered transportation is a contributor and a not insignificant one either. I look forward to the time when we have our circulator to be all electric and we have electric cars operating in the district. It's not just climate change. These buses contribute substantially to bad air, which increases the problem of asthma in the district, which is already fairly severe. So I hope we can use this roundtable to find out why WMATA thinks it can't get to all electric buses till 2045. What are the problems? Can we offer some sort of a blueprint? And as my colleague Janice Lewis George mentioned, other places are doing better. And the example would be Los Angeles, which plans to have all electrification by 2030. So I hope we can do as well and maybe even better. And I hope this roundtable helps us get underneath that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Che. I can't tell if Councilmember McDuffie is here. If you are, do you want to give an opening statement?
I am, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for being a little at some trouble getting on. I apologize for that. And I'm going to, I would like to give an opening statement. Again, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little coming from another meeting, and so I'm trying to get my my materials together. If you would, I don't know if there's anybody else who needs to give one before me, Mr. Chairman.
Nope, we're ready for the witnesses.
Okay. All right. Well, let me
So
just
for a minute.
I appreciate it. No, I'm ready to jump in. I appreciate
Okay.
it. And I want to begin by thanking you and your team for holding this important roundtable on speeding up the electrification of WMATA's bus fleet, and the expert witnesses who you're going to hear testify about this extraordinarily important issue. WMATA's current target date for electrifying its fleet, I believe, is 2045. And while this target date does track with the requirements of the Clean Energy DC Omnibus Amendment Act that Councilmember Chair and I ushered through our committee some years ago, which mandates that 50% of the public buses be zero or low emission by 2030 and 100% by 2045. It doesn't reflect the level of urgency I think is necessary to combat the environmental issues we're facing. Electrification reduces greenhouse gas emissions, thereby improving air quality and public health and combating the effects of climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions contribute to climate change by trapping heat. They also contribute to poor air quality, which can cause respiratory disease. And so it's really our most vulnerable communities, specifically low-income and communities of color, who face the harshest consequences of climate change, including unprecedented flooding and power outages, as well as poor air quality and high rates of respiratory diseases. It's also important, I think, to remember that these are the same communities that are still reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic, having suffered disproportionately high rates of infection, hospitalization, and death. And so I view electrification as not only an environmental issue, but also one of public health and racial equity. That said, I do have concerns about how this process will move forward. For example, an electrified fleet is going to require bus garages with electric charging equipment. And I think it's important to ensure that industrial facilities do not continue to be concentrated in one ward or area of the city. I know you all have heard me say that before, but I think it bears repeating every opportunity we get to cover these very important issues. The benefits of such facilities accrue to residents across the District of Columbia, and it is fundamentally unfair to ask or impose upon only certain residents the bulk of the burden. Earlier this week, I had the great privilege to speak at the first District of Columbia Clean Energy Summit. I spoke about my commitment to clean energy as well as my commitment to racial equity, and said the path toward clean energy must make its way through the most vulnerable communities rather than going around them. Electrification is a step along that path, and I look forward to hearing from the expert witnesses today about how we can speed up our stride while ensuring no one is left behind carrying all the water. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. So let me invite the 8 witnesses in. Elliot Nagin, who's a senior writer at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Carl Wheeler, who's the East Coast Regional Sales Manager for BYD Coach and Bus. Jason Yan, who is Director of Sales Operations for BYD Coach and Bus. Manuel Toussaint, who's Vice President of Legal, Public Affairs, and External Communications for Nova Bus. Benoit St. Cyr, who's Product Manager at Nova Bus. Jesus Montez, who is a Senior Executive Officer at Vehicle Acquisition, Vehicle Engineering and Acquisition for LA, that's Los Angeles Metro. Mac Dressman, who's Associate for Transform Transportation at US PERG, and James Pittman, who's Vice President for PEPCO Region District of Columbia. I do want to note, as everybody's kiting in, this hearing was limited to witnesses that we invited, and we were looking at a good mix of manufacturers, operators, some environmental advocacy groups, and PEPCO as our district electric utility, so that we can get at these issues of how harmful or not is electrification of buses, and what are limitations, if any, and so forth. So we did not invite Metro, and we can always have another hearing with Metro. The Committee of the Whole has oversight over Metro. We're going to have a clock that is going to be ascending. So if you look at the clock, you'll see how long you've been testifying. Because we only have 8 witnesses, I'm not going to cut you off at 3 minutes or 4 minutes, but if you go too long, council members, in fact, others, maybe myself, might be falling asleep. So don't go too long, but I won't cut you off. Be mindful of the clock. We'll begin with Mr. Nagin, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to set the stage today. My name is Elliot Nagin, and I work with the Union of Concerned Scientists, one of more than 24 organizations that make up the Metro Electric Bus Coalition. Our goal is to prod Metro to transition to tailpipe emissions-free buses as quickly as possible. As was mentioned earlier, the Metro board signed off on a plan earlier this year to electrify Metro's bus fleet by 2045, which is lagging behind major and even smaller bus agencies around the country. It's already been mentioned that LA Metro and Houston Metro are now planning to electrify their fleets by 2030. And at the same time, the Biden administration's goal is to electrify 50,000 transit buses, about 70% of the US fleet, by 2030. But according to Metro's schedule, only 275 of the Metro's buses, less than 20%, will be electric by 2030. Now, given Metro's bureaucratic inertia, it's highly unlikely the agency could accelerate its electric bus procurement schedule to meet the Biden administration's goal. That said, why can't it meet the Clean Energy DCX timeline of 50% zero emission vehicles by 2030? The benefits for doing so are clear. According to a 2020 Sierra Club report, electrifying half of the Metro's fleet by 2030 would save the transit agency hundreds of millions of dollars in lifetime bus operating and maintenance costs, slash its fleet's annual carbon pollution by more than 58,000 tons, and dramatically reduce the toll toxic air pollution has on our region's most vulnerable residents. That's why our coalition is urging Metro to move more quickly to protect public health and help avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Now, I could go into much more detail, but I don't know if it's worth taking up your time right now to talk about the role that fossil fuel buses and transportation play. But I will say that it's already been mentioned that that tailpipe pollution from fossil fuel buses have been linked to cancer, respiratory and heart disease, and premature death. And one of the biggest problems we have here in town, as has been mentioned earlier, is the rate of asthma among our residents. Both the fossil fuel buses that they own right now, natural gas buses and diesel buses, emit hydrocarbons, which and they also emit nitrogen oxides, which produce ground level ozone or smog. Now, smog in this area is so bad that the American Lung Association's most recent State of the Air report gave our region an ozone grade of F. Now, smog exacerbates, as was mentioned earlier, allergies and lung conditions, including asthma. And asthma is a major health problem here in DC. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 11.4% of DC residents suffer from the disease, which is nearly 40% more higher than the national average. And I should also mention that Washingtonians are not affected equally. Asthma rates are significantly higher in low-income neighborhoods. The DC Department of Health found that in 2014, 17.6% of adults living in Ward 8 had asthma, while only 5.8% of adults in Ward 2 suffered from it. So no one is suggesting that the Metro's bus fleet is solely responsible for the high asthma rates in our city, let alone the incidence of lung cancer and heart disease. But toxic emissions from buses that drive up and down our streets every 20 minutes, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, no doubt pose a threat to the health of local regional residents. On top of that, we have a problem with carbon emissions coming out of these buses. And in Washington, D.C., the transportation sector is the second largest source of carbon emissions, accounting for 25% of the city's output. While in greater D.C., Maryland, Virginia, it accounts for a whopping 40% of the carbon emissions. Now, considering the catastrophic events that we just had in the last few months, including the worst flooding for decades in Central Europe and unprecedented drought in the U.S. Southwest and wildfires out west, we have to move quickly to cut carbon emissions. That means replacing fossil fuel vehicles of all kinds, including buses. Now, neither diesel electric hybrids nor natural gas buses could be considered low emission alternatives compared to battery electric buses. Even so, Metro is not only planning to continue to buy diesel electric hybrids and natural gas buses until 2030, it also plans to increase the percentage of natural gas buses in its fleet to roughly half and spend more than $5 million on a new natural gas fueling facility, presumably because the agency falsely believes natural gas is significantly cleaner than diesel and diesel electric hybrids. In fact, the Argonne National Laboratory found that in many circumstances, natural gas buses emit nearly the same level of carbon emissions as conventional diesel buses. By inference, natural gas buses are no better, and in many cases likely worse, for the climate than diesel electric hybrids. When comparing life cycle carbon emissions, electric buses are superior to fossil fuel buses across the country, no matter where they get their electricity. It's important to set the record straight on this issue because a Metro board member falsely asserted that electric buses are not necessarily any cleaner than fossil fuel buses if they get their power from coal or natural gas power plants. In fact, battery electric buses in the Washington metro area would have 70% lowered life cycle carbon emissions than diesel buses, 65% lower than natural gas buses, and 60% lower than diesel electric hybrids, based on 2016 EPA power plant emission data. And the good news is that the electric grid in our region has gotten cleaner over the last 5 years. So the electric bus emissions now would be likely 5% better. In sum, Metro's current plan to continue to purchase fossil fuel buses until 2030 and slow walk adding electric buses to its fleet will condemn DC area residents to decades of bus toxic and carbon pollution. Other major transit agencies across the country and smaller ones in our region are facing the same challenges as Metro to replace their fossil fuel fleets with zero tailpipe emission buses. But unlike Metro, they are addressing these challenges head on and have ambitious plans to transition as quickly as possible. There is no reason why Metro cannot do the same. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nagan. Give me just a moment here. I'm told by staff that Mr. Montez has a 2 o'clock hard stop, so I'm going to go to him next. He's number 6 on the list. He is with LA Metro.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I was asked to speak on Metro's experience with transitioning from CNG bus operations to zero emissions. One of the things I want to say is since the Metro Board, Los Angeles Metro Board, directed our group to begin the transition in 2017, we've learned quite a bit. In traveling, I've had the opportunity to visit agencies who've already started or completed their transition in Asia, Europe, and in the United States. And one of the things I've learned is that each agency has its own unique challenges. And so I cannot speak at all on WMATA. I just don't know them well enough. All I can do is talk about our own experience. As we've gone through, we've learned quite a bit. When we first started, our belief was that the vehicles were going to be the hardest challenge. Then it became, nope, it's the infrastructure is going to be harder. And now more recently, we're realizing it's actually the software, the charge management. So let me just kind of go through it a little bit. Our system has 2,400 buses, CNG buses. We have 10 maintenance yards that we're going to have to transition. So an average about 180 to 220 buses per division. Our blocks, service blocks, are anywhere from 25 miles to over 300 miles. 70% of them are within 150 miles. Reliable bus range for 40-foot battery electric buses is about 150 miles. So that means that the service blocks that we have above that will need en route chargers. The biggest challenges that we have are cost. We estimate that the full transition is going to be about $3.5 billion. $1.5 billion.
Did you say million or billion?
Billion.
Okay.
Approximately 2 billion for the buses and 1.5 billion for the infrastructure at both the divisions and the en route locations. The unknown cost right now is how much electricity is going to cost. Another unknown cost is the charge management software. That's very critical, and I'll touch on that in a second. And the cellular costs, and I'll touch on that in a second too. Next on the list is power at the divisions. Most of our divisions have approximately 3 to 5 megawatts of power available. But in order to transition to full battery electric, we have to, with unmanaged charging, we have to up that to 12 to 17 megawatts. To give you an understanding of what that means is a skyscraper uses about approximately 3 megawatts of power. So we would have to add the power for 4 or 5 skyscrapers to each of our divisions in order to meet service. That's not trivial. So it takes time to coordinate with the utilities to make sure that the power is there. The other part is space at the divisions. And okay, so in order to bring in the power that is required, space for a substation is needed. Where are you going to put that? You're going to need space for the electrical cabinets. You're going to need space for the chargers themselves. That is not trivial at all. We have the agencies in both Europe and Asia. Some of them have decided to build extra divisions because of the space constraints. So fortunately in Metro, we don't have that quite of an issue, but we do, space is a significant item. For the en route chargers, again, because of the range limitations, we have to find sites, layover sites where it makes sense. And layover sites are not easy to find because A, they cannot be in a public area where it has to be in a secure area where the equipment is not going to be vandalized and the equipment is not going to be taken over by someone parking in that spot. So it has to be a space that's reserved for just the service. So trying to find those spots in key areas is a challenge. The other challenge is technology. The pace, the technology on both the vehicles and the charging equipment is advancing very quickly and not at the same pace. And so one of the things that we're finding is that things becomes obsolete very quickly. The bus that we're buying right now is basically being no longer, let me just, the charging equipment as an example is no longer available. The ones that we bought about a year or so ago. Now, if we want more of those are not available. Now the contractors say, hey, we have something that's better. Okay, great, but it's not going to be available for 6-7 months or so because it's still going through testing. So that's another issue. And I'll stop in a couple of seconds. When I said talk about power demands, there's opportunity to reduce the power at the divisions from say 12 to 18 megawatts. There's something lower to 7 to 8. but it requires charge management. And that means that not all the bus, as soon as you park it, not all the buses are charging at the same time, but rather you match the charging to across the whole time that the charge is available. So not everything's charged at the same time. That's not trivial, because now you have to have buses that are going to be assigned to certain blocks. So you have a bus that's, so you have a block, for example, that's say 80 miles, and you only need a state of charge of 80%. And so there's a bus that already has 80%, you don't need to charge it. Or you have a bus that's 30% as assigned to a block that requires only 80%. So you don't have to charge to 100%. You only need to charge it for a portion of that. And that's charge management. And there's software available for doing that. But what happens in the real world, and this is important, what happens in the real world, there's accidents, there's delays, there's bridges, bus bridges that need to be put out. So that software has to be very, very flexible. And so that the end user, the dispatchers, can use it and adjust for the things that happen throughout the day. And that's still being developed, and the cost for that is really, we're still working out those costs. But in order to make charge management work, you have to have real-time information of exactly what's going on in your operating environment, what's going on in the shops, in the yards, etc. You have to have real-time information, and that means everything has to be connected to a network. And cellular is the easiest choice, but what's the cost for that? So those are the type of things and all of those things. So you have multiple components, multiple systems, multiple vehicles, multiple contracts. All of them have to communicate in real time without interruptions. So those are the challenges we're working through right now. I'll stop now. I know I've gone way over.
Thank you. And I think what I'm going to do, because am I correct that you have to leave at 2?
Yeah.
Which means, because you're on different time, I believe, you have 15 minutes, and there are, I believe, 4 council members. So that would be about 5 minutes each. Why don't I turn to council members for questions of you, Mr. Montez, and then we'll continue with the witnesses. I'm going to start with this. So LA is scheduled to be 100% electric buses by when?
The target is 2030. And that's, to be very, very frank, is a hard goal because that means that we're going to have to transition multiple divisions in sync. And so when you think about I said it's about $3.5 billion. So it's $350 million per division for the en route charging, the division charging, and the vehicles. And so that's a heavy number to try to get.
How many electric buses do you have at this point?
We have 40 in service on our orange BRT line. And we have a total of 145 that were ordered, 40 of which have been delivered and in service.
So your experience to date is only 40 buses.
Yes.
Are you finding lower maintenance costs?
I can't speak on that right now. I can say that the electric portion associated with the zero emission, that's been fairly reliable, but there have been integration issues between that system and the rest of the bus. But those things are not abnormal, considering that this is a new technology and everyone's trying to figure things out. And with the challenge that I mentioned earlier, that the pace of innovation is very quick. We're not experiencing anything truly abnormal.
Okay. What about, it's probably too soon to speak to whether you're seeing any difference in terms of fleet availability or service interruptions?
No, it's just the typical stuff that you would expect. So there were integration issues between the chargers and the vehicles initially, where the things are not communicating properly. And those are being corrected as we go along. So nothing significant.
Have you had to redesign routes?
No, not yet. So that's our goal. Our goal is to minimize any impact to our service. And so far, we have not had to. And with the use of en route chargers, we plan to minimize having to adjust routes or block lanes.
So what I'm taking from this is that there are some bumps
Yeah,
as you transition to a new technology, but you're not seeing service falling apart. The buses seem to be reliable. It's too soon to say that savings from lower maintenance costs have materialized.
right. And again, one of the things I mentioned previously is there are other costs that we had not anticipated. Charge management is going to be key in order to keep electric power demand charges down. And right now, we don't know what that final cost is going to be. And we don't know what the cost for cellular is going to be because of the need for real-time information.
Let me turn to colleagues. I don't know what kind of clock there is because supposedly it's about 5 minutes. The Councilmember Louis George, are you here? Councilmember Che?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask this question about, the lag time between investing in a whole lot of money and recovering in savings that investment. Mr. Nagin, you had mentioned, for example, the enormous amount of future money that can be saved both in maintenance and in operation. And Mr. Montes, you have cautioned, I think, right, that it's going to be a while until these are actually realized. Could you put some more details on that? In other words, if you had to think about our system and if we were going to, accelerate things to 2030, all the particulars you identified, and there were a number of them, what would be the total cost that we should anticipate? And then what are the savings that will accrue and about how long will that take?
I don't know WMATA system well enough to comment on that. I really don't.
Well, how about the period of time to accrue the benefits of going to all electric?
In terms of the benefits, well, you're going to get to zero emissions very much faster. That's a benefit.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
Because we're always worried about budgets, right? Worried about money.
Yeah. Right now, to be frank with you, just because of all the unknown costs that we have not been developed, utilities, the cost that we're very clear on is on the infrastructure and the vehicles. Everything else is being developed. On the maintenance, we're making certain assumptions. But we have not yet realized any savings yet on maintenance. We have not been operating long enough. The utilities, we have not been operating long enough. All those are unknown. So I can't really, I would be totally guessing if I could tell you by when we should be realizing any kind of benefit.
Well, okay, because, we experience this in other areas as well, even in our energy use by buildings. And we understand that the upfront costs can be really, really significant. And we've tried to figure out ways to ease that problem. And then after you get underway, I mean, the return on investment is significant, but you have to get over that period. So, but thank you. That's kind of one of the things I'm kind of interested in. The other thing is, I have some really wacky question.
Okay.
And I really have it for cars. Do you know, is there any possibility, let's say for cars, we're talking about buses, but why couldn't vehicles have some, as we get better and better for solar, why couldn't they have some ability to capture solar themselves and provide their own energy? Is there anything out there even being thought of along those lines?
We had a vendor who came up, who approached us with that idea maybe about 2 years ago. So we do know that there are people in the industry working on that. Mm-hmm. To be frank with you, when I think about that, where you have the solar, you have electric equipment that goes that you have to put on the car in order to convert that into usable energy. I don't know whether you're converting enough solar energy to be totally beneficial, considering all the other.
Okay, but it is heartening to me that somebody's out there thinking about this.
Yeah.
And in order for, in your case, did you
Yep.
all sit down? Do you have some sort of a blueprint for how to get from here to there and the intermediate steps that need to be taken and by when and that sort of thing? And if so, is that proprietary or is that something you could share with us?
So in California, the California Air Resources Board has a mandate that we need to transition by 2040. And they require that we develop a rollout plan for that. It should be a public document. I would have to go through our contract administrators to see whether it can be released. But that is our we do have a rollout plan.
Okay, well, if it's possible, I would really appreciate for us to be able to have a look at that, because we need to have targets, long range, and then intermediate and steps to take along the way. And that, I think that'll help facilitate the transition here in DC. But thank you, and thank you very much also, Mr. Nagin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a few more questions because I don't believe that Councilmember McDuffie or Councilmember Lewis George are still with us. And if you have a few more questions, Councilmember Chair, I'll turn to you in a minute. Mr. Montez, you're Vice President, Senior Executive Officer for Vehicle Acquisition. So I don't know how involved you are on the operations side. Do you know, is there a substantial difference in training for bus drivers?
They do go through some training. One of the key things is for at the layover spots, they have to be able to park the bus in a certain area so that when you charge, they're aligned with the pantograph. That's one area. There are certain different set of faults, events that have to be managed. So yes, there is separate training for the operators.
But is it hugely different and huge?
No.
What about, are you getting any feedback from riders?
So far, it's all been positive. They like the quiet ride. They like the newer buses. In the buses that we have, the ride quality seems to be better. It was an unintended consequence, but the ride quality appears to be better on the battery electric buses we have.
Now, Councilmember Che asked you about a transition plan. And you said that you have one that's required of all transit agencies in California. Would you say that the rollout has been consistent with as planned?
So far.
What about funding for purchases? Can you speak to that? Have you got
challenge
assistance?
We need a tremendous amount of assistance. So what we were spending prior for our CNG was an average of about $160 million a year. This effort is going to require us to go to about $350 million a year, just in rough numbers. And so that's a gap of $190 million, which is not easy to bridge.
But are there funding opportunities such as through the federal government?
There are, but there's a huge competition for it. There's huge competition for it.
Okay.
And there's some that, I'll give you just an example. There are some grants that in the past we were successful in getting. More recently, we have not. And part of the problem is we're CNG. And so properties that start starting up with diesel and going to battery electric, the level of improvement is better for them. They can demonstrate, we're going to get a bigger benefit than for LA Metro, who's already starting off at near zero emissions with our CNG buses. So it's just, competition is just getting harder and harder. There's more people going after the money. The pot of money is increasing, but just competition is fierce.
Councilmember Che, do you have any other questions before we continue with the rest witnesses?
Well, I just wanted to ask one, and that was your experience in working with the utility companies. Now, you did make some mention of the fact that, if we really go full on with our buses, and we're also moving to provide charging stations for our vehicles, both in buildings and on the street. What was the kind of a way that you were able to work with the utility companies? And is there a serious problem with there being, I never thought this would be a problem, being enough electricity for all of this?
No, it's not a problem. So we have two utilities in our area, Southern California Edison and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Both of them have been very, very willing to work with us. So the willingness to work with us is not an issue, but just the coordination and everyone says there's enough power in the region. It's just getting it to where we need it is a challenge. Finding space at our divisions, or if we don't have space in our divisions, finding space adjacent to the divisions to put a substation. That's where the challenge is, and it's not trivial. So 2 to 4 years is what is reasonable to expect.
Mhm. Okay, that was really the only follow-up I had, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And thank you to these two witnesses. I appreciate your helping us out.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
Mr. Montez will drop off. Mr. Nagan will stick around and we'll hear from the other witnesses. Mr. Montez, thank you as well. I appreciate Los Angeles contributing to our efforts here. So let's continue. Carl Wheeler, who's with BYD. Mr. Wheeler?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. BYD, appreciate you having us today at your roundtable, and we're very excited to possibly partner with WMATA and getting you guys some electric buses there. One big part that I have in this role is that I worked for Baltimore MTA for over 18 years. We were responsible for getting 750 buses on the street every morning. My key role was to purchase the buses. So in my time with MTA, I purchased over 400 hybrid buses. With that, we've learned the ups and downs of still having, when you have a hybrid bus, you still have a diesel engine, and you still have an exhaust system which is very complicated with DPF filters that need to be cleaned, and you're still emitting a lot of emissions into the air. Later on, within like 2018, 2017, we found that some of the new diesel engines were putting out about the same emissions as a clean diesel was. So we actually dropped out of purchasing hybrids and went just with clean diesels. And we were, like I said, we were getting about the same emissions. Like I stated before, BYD is committed to, for going all electric. I did mention before, I did hear that I think Councilman Mary was interested if solar could be used. We currently do have a project in Frederick, Maryland, where they have 4 of our buses, and they're using our landfill as a solar array. So the landfill is all set up with solar and gives the power to the 4 buses they have there as a pilot, and it's been very successful.
Do you have more to your statement?
No, I stepped in on for this council as more as far as answering any specs and technical questions. So, I'm all set up for that as far as, speaking today.
Okay. And now I have next also from BYD, Jason Yan, but I don't see him.
Yeah, he turned it over to me in case you guys had any technical specs for the meeting today. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I will have some questions for you.
Yes, sir.
Go to Ms. Toussaint from Nova Bus.
Oh, hello, everybody, and good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and the members of the DC Council. So I'm Emmanuel Toussaint, Vice President for Legal, Regulatory, and Public Affairs at Nova Bus. Novabus, we are one of the main transit bus manufacturer in America, and we have a facility in Plattsburgh, New York since 2009. We manufacture different type of buses, obviously electric buses, as well as the other propulsion system like hybrid buses, diesel and CNG. Also attending is Benoit Saint-Cyr at Novabus. He is the product planning manager, and he is responsible for the description of scope of our electric offering, the FSC Plus. And he is here to answer any technical question that you may have after my testimony. So thank you to allow me to testify before you today on the electrification of WMATA transit bus fleet. This is a very important topic for us, but also for the society in general. And at Novabus, we believe strongly that we have to transition to the electric buses, and we want to lead the transformation for a cleaner transportation industry. We want to help the transit agencies like WMATA to define the building blocks of this ecosystem via knowledge sharing and also best practices, so that together we can reach our goal for a cleaner transportation industry. It's really good to see that multiple levels of government, they are aligning with the need for a cleaner transportation industry by offering different funding programs, even if, as it has been mentioned previously, there is many transit agencies who have to fight to obtain their funding. But we see more and more funding that is being available for electric buses. So this is really good. Historically, the funding has focused on the bus itself. So in the past, or even today, for hybrid and diesel or CNG buses, the funding is really only for the bus themselves. But with the electrification, it really changed. And we have to think about all the infrastructure costs and the utilities, as it has been mentioned also. And approaching electromobility as an ecosystem can allow for a better identification of key milestones and help establish the actual speed of deployment of electric fleet. We believe that there is a minimum of 7 elements that needs to be considered by transit agencies while transitioning to electric vehicle. There's the electric bus itself, the charging infrastructure, the bus depot or garage, the route planning. It is extremely important. Each city is different, and so each transit agency has to adapt in order to meet its need. The service support is also important. Another one is the workforce training. You asked a question, Chairman, about the training, but yes, drivers and mechanics and the other people working in the garage, they need to be trained as well, and they need to be well trained for safety and also to better operate the electric buses. And the last point is the telematic and diagnostic, so that we can really have connected vehicle with smart cities. And of course, also to be included as a core element of this ecosystem is the grid infrastructure and battery technology. Transit agencies need to have a strong partnership with their energy providers. And this also has been repeated by the other today. So I think that we all agree on that. And there's also some pressure or some barrier to entry, which have been identified as financial. So funding is definitively one of the biggest one. We need to make sure that the upfront cost associated with the procurement of electric buses and infrastructure is addressed at the very beginning. Technology roadmap is also important, including the type of battery and the range of electric buses, and the availability and the training of the workforce. So if I just mention a few, go in more detail regarding a few items that I mentioned, the electric vehicle system that have less complex configuration for a better control on cost, maintenance with easier access to module for cleaning and repair, and easier ramp up in terms of training, it eases the operation of those systems. Regarding the workforce training and safety, a few points to consider is really the technical skills that are required to make sure that the training workforce can meet the demand. And I mentioned already the safety aspect, but there's the diagnostic, the schematic, networking, all those things, how to work with high voltage, all those aspects are really important. Regarding the charging infrastructure, energy management protocols are needed to ensure an undisrupted, steady, and predictable electric supply. And the range of the electric bus, typically it will depend on the battery capacity, could range between 564 kilowatt hour to 361 of nominal capacity. Which can be translated in a range on our side between 211 and 292 miles, depending of the routes, depending of the weather condition, for example. And the range recommendation from the different bus OEM of the battery electric bus should be aligned with the route planning of the transit agency. And Mr. Montes said that the charge management is key, and I totally agree with that. I think that the optimization of the charging infrastructure, it is essential. And what happened overnight or during the day at the depot is really important for uninterrupted service at the transit agency. Before electric buses go into the daily public transportation service, energy consuming activities like heating the bus interior should be done at the bus depot while the bus is still connected to the grid. This is really, it helped for the battery. So this is something that many transit agencies have started doing. And one of the very important aspect is the capital cost. So I already say that it's not only about the buses themselves now, it's also about the charging infrastructure. Council Member McDuffie mentioned it at the very beginning of this hearing. And when we look at other transit agencies, it takes easily 2 to 3 years to build a new garage when it is being needed. There has been also some cost that has been shared previously by city, and a year ago, ATA estimate that to convert the entire US fleet to electric vehicle or zero emission vehicle, it would be somewhere around $68 to $74 billion. And we have seen even a higher amount depending again on each city and the need for the infrastructure. We are currently in the US at roughly 2% of electric buses in operation in the US. But we know also, and it has been said, we think that there will be less maintenance costs with it. Of course, it is very early to say exactly how much it will be. But this is a very high level overview. And in conclusion, we invite you to look at NovaBus as a technical resource for WMATA. While it moves toward transitioning to zero emission buses. And as an OEM, we can assure you that we are ready to build hundreds of electric buses and having a clear vision from the elected official as well as from the transit agencies, it is essential. But we also have to understand that many steps must be taken in order to transition successfully to an entire electric fleet. So my colleague Benoit and myself, we will be happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Toussaint. So your colleague is here for questions, not a statement?
Yes, exactly. If the council has any question, we'll be both happy to answer.
Thank you. Let me turn then to Mac Dressman, who's with US PERG.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'll keep my testimony fairly brief because people have already covered a lot of the key points. But my name is Mac Dressman, and I'm an associate on the electric bus campaign with grassroots public interest advocacy group PERG. And I'd like to speak today about the importance of making this rapid transition to clean electric buses and also provide some broader context about the current status of electric buses in the United States. So as DC already knows, continuing to rely on fossil fuel powered vehicles threatens our health and the climate. Traffic-related air pollution kills an estimated 58,000 Americans every year. and transportation is the single largest contributor to climate change in the United States. And that's why transitioning to clean electric vehicles in the district is so important. Electric buses aren't just good for the environment and public health. They're also a smart investment for transit agencies over the long term due to the reduced maintenance and fuel costs. So for example, Chicago rolled out 2 electric buses in 2014. And according to the Chicago Transit Authority, the vehicles have performed well. They've had no difficulty with extreme temperatures, and they've saved the CTA more than $24,000 each year in fuel costs and $30,000 each year in maintenance costs. Additionally, according to the California Air Resources Board, while electric transit buses cost around $200,000 more than diesel buses, the lifetime fuel and maintenance savings of electric buses are around $400,000. As these successes pile up, more and more municipalities are adopting electric transit buses. Just this week, Austin, Texas approved the purchase of 197 new electric buses over the next 5 years. I also want to share a few ideas that Washington, D.C. can keep in mind to help ensure a successful transition to electric buses. As others have mentioned, collaboration with utilities is really essential to help make the transition as affordable as possible. Some municipalities have adopted financing programs like Pay As You Save, in which utilities front part of the initial investment for electric buses and allow citizens to pay back the utility bills as they save on fuel and maintenance costs. And these pay-as-you-save financing programs can help agencies overcome the higher upfront costs of electric buses and deliver savings immediately. Public officials can also consider restructuring electric rates so as to provide discounted off-peak charging, limit excessive demand charges, and experiment with policies and practices that allow the buses to be used for energy storage, and employ vehicle-to-grid technology to ensure that electric buses can work as efficiently as possible with the electric grid. More information about these programs can be found in our report, Paying for Electric Buses, which I'm happy to share with the committee. So with all that in mind, I urge WMATA to move quicker on making the transition and move up the goal for an all-electric bus fleet to 2030 to protect the climate and the lungs of DC residents. As a former Georgetown student who relied on the district's public bus system to get to work and move around the city, I know how important it is for DC to take the lead on clean transportation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dressman. We don't have a copy, or I don't have a copy of your statement. Could you provide that? And you mentioned that research report on paying for buses. Could you provide that as well?
Sure. Would you like me to put that in the chat, send as an email?
I would say send it as an email, just as when you communicated with us to testify.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. James Pittman.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, Councilmember Che, other attending council members, staff, and the listening and participating audience. Thank you for the invitation to testify during today's important public roundtable on the electrification of the transportation sector in the District of Columbia, with the emphasis on the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority's bus fleet. As you mentioned, I'm James Pittman, Vice President of the PEPCO region of the District of Columbia. Please know that PEPCO is committed to working with the District of Columbia and WMATA to enable its transition to a zero emission and electric fleet in alignment with the district's Clean Energy Plan and the DC Clean Energy Omnibus Amendment Act of 2018. Current district law requires that buses be 100% zero emissions by 2045 and 50% zero emissions by 2030. PEPCO stands ready to work collaboratively with the District of Columbia and WMATA to meet the established goals. I will note that 2021 marks PEPCO's 125th anniversary serving the District of Columbia and its residents, and we do not take this privilege lightly. PEPCO has always viewed itself as a member of the communities we serve, serving over 350,000 customers across all 8 wards. Our years of service have provided the company with the opportunity to be directly involved in the positive evolution and progress of the district, including the policies and plans to advance a cleaner, brighter, and smarter energy future for the district and its residents, doing so equitably and inclusively. We recognize that as an electric company serving the district, we are central to achieving the district's transportation electrification roadmap and assisting the district meeting its landmark goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. PEPCO has made several recent filings with the Public Service Commission of the District of Columbia, which are responsive to the Commission's oversight in this important area and reflective of PEPCO's commitment to addressing climate change and building resilience. Most recently, we have filed an electrification study, which was executed by the Brattle Group, a high-level climate solutions plan that builds upon PEPCO's 2020 climate commitment, in which the company committed to reducing its own greenhouse gas footprint 70% by the end of 2025 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and help our customers and communities do the same. These plans are aligned with and designed to assist the district in meeting its goals through actionable programs and initiatives, including those that will help all of our valued customers reduce their carbon footprint and save money through reducing their energy usage. The company continues to advance new technologies to effectively manage and operate the electric distribution system, including the integration and operation of distributed energy resources, while enabling customer-focused solutions such as solar and battery energy storage. We recognize that we must ready the grid to enable these new technologies and increase electrification, including the transportation sector, while we prepare for increased and more frequent severe weather events as a result of climate change. The implementation of new technologies and system upgrades, along with the appropriate and coordinated planning to enable increased electrification, will ensure a more resilient, more reliable, smarter, cleaner grid that's prepared to respond to increased weather events and enable broad-scale decarbonization and electrification. As a step in our planning process, the electrification study the company submitted to the Commission in August focused on several important questions. One, at what rate do we expect the load grow based on the policies and plans being advanced by the district to combat climate change? Two, is it within historical norms? And three, can the system handle it? The key findings of the studies are as follows. PEPCO's electric system can handle the load growth on a system anticipated under the district's landmark policy goals. Two, the district has seen periods of tremendous growth over the past decades, including mid last century with the introduction of air conditioning, and recently as this past decade with the significant growth of office and apartment buildings in the district. As rates of load growth expected, or the maximum demand on the system over the next 30 years are consistent with, or even less than, growth rates experienced in the past, particularly when aided by energy efficiency and load flexibility options. There will be a shift in the terms of PEPCO systems moving from summer peaking to winter peaking systems due to the electrification of heating in homes and building. There will be necessary investments, just as there have been in the past, to accommodate this growth, while both maintaining the reliability and resilience of the system and integrating the new and emerging technologies to drive decarbonization, including transportation electrification. And while PEPCO has already experienced and managed much higher rates of load growth than what we will see in the coming 30 years, there are many technologies and programs available today to significantly reduce the growth rate in the long term. In response to the question regarding the cost of electrification, while that question was not answered in this study, I would note that there will be incremental investments required as we advance our climate solutions plan and move forward toward decarbonization. There will be a cost to achieve this end, which will occur over a multi-decade horizon, with the focus on affordability and support for our most vulnerable customers. The large-scale electrification of buildings and transportation in the district is expected to result in load growth that is within the range of growth rates that PEPCO has experienced and managed in the past. The impacts of this load growth, however, will be mitigated by energy efficiency programs and technologies to enable load flexibility. The current availability of some excess capacity overall for managing near-term growth in the heating-related load, and as a result of long-range planning horizon, are over which to meet the district's goals. I would like to focus on this last point because I think it's important. We work daily to assess, evaluate, and plan for and address the needs of the electric grid with a focus on long-term planning while meeting immediate needs. This is achieved by working collaboratively with the district agencies and the economic development and community-based organizations, as well as specific customers such as WMATA, to understand future needs, both at the macro and micro level, as capacity needs must be addressed at both a system-wide and localized level. Based on this information and engagement, we can make informed decisions to design, propose, and implement electric delivery solutions to meet those needs, some of which require new investments in a timely manner. PEPCO is engaged with WMATA on advancing programs and electrifying specific sites to enable the transition of its fleets to electric. Our discussions are focused on two primary areas: advancing the infrastructure that is required to enable this new transportation future, and a rate structure that will be responsive. We have to think strategically how we can improve the economics for bus electrification, including seeking resources from the federal government to support this priority. PEPCO sees its role as a connector in this process. We must make ready infrastructure to allow for the installation of charging stations and provide interconnection to the system. And foremost, we must advance the infrastructure in a close coordination with collaboration with WMATA and other fleet operators, such as the District of Columbia government, as we work toward a transition to an electrified transportation system. The process is iterative and requires an understanding of customer timelines, charging needs, and use cases. PEPCO then takes this information to assess what needs can be met today and what system upgrades and investments may be needed to meet the specific needs of customer-specific sites and locations in order to both serve the customer while maintaining the overall reliability and safe operations of the electric distribution system for all customers connected to the system. Toward that end, the Commission approved a suite of transportation electrification programs for PEPCO previously, and our impending Climate Solutions Plan 5-year program plan filing has 4 portfolios, with one being transportation electrification. Within this portfolio, PEPCO will advance a plan that will focus on programs to expand infrastructure and address rate design changes contemplative of enabling the electrification of public buses efficiently and affordably for both the fleet operator and the customer. We continue to engage WMATA regularly to understand program constructs that would be most beneficial and supportive, as well as the independent actions that are in progress by WMATA. Overall, our approach to a significant conversion to an electric fleet is to work with transit agencies to understand their plans and objectives, particularly regarding charging electric buses, and to identify targeted solutions to reduce barriers to bus electrification. WMATA has shared its commitment to meeting important district goals of zero emissions. WMATA is also actively seeking grant and federal support to offset costs and is actively engaged with PEPCO to develop programs that will assist in accelerating important transition. We recognize the importance of moving expeditiously and in alignment with the district's roadmap to decarbonize the district with a focus on transportation and built environment. We know that the 2 largest contributors to carbon emissions of the district are the built environment and transportation. Therefore, we continue to work collaboratively and in coordination with the DC Sustainable Energy Utility and implement programs to assist both residential and commercial customers in reducing their energy usage. And with WMATA, the District Department of Energy and Environment and the District Department of Transportation and others are planning a more electrified future regarding transportation. And as I noted previously, we believe that with a combination of this focus on energy efficiency while working to electrify transportation and other aspects of the economy, the distribution grid is capable of handling this transition. However, it will require thoughtful and timely planning, incremental investments, and ongoing collaboration to ensure that we are meeting necessary system upgrades in a way that aligns with both district and customer goals and needs, does so in a manner that maintains overall system reliability, resiliency, affordability, and accessibility for all customers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we are committed to assisting the District of Columbia in meeting its climate goals, with affordability, equity, and inclusion being fundamental guiding principles. We look forward to working with you and with your support, enable a cleaner transportation future for the district and its residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pittman, and that concludes all of the testimony. Thank you to each of you. So let me ask some questions. Although I do want to check, Councilmember Che may have to leave, or she may have stepped aside. Are you still here, Councilmember Che? Because I'll let you go first if you are. And she's not speaking up. So let me start. I think I want to start with you, Mr. Pittman. So I think one of the hesitations that WMATA has expressed is that there isn't the capacity and that this is enormously complicated and hugely expensive to electrify buses. Now, I'm not talking about the buses themselves. I'm talking about your end of it, which is the infrastructure. Can you speak to whether it is very expensive and whether there's any mystery around it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think Mr. Montes from LA Metro spoke about this. It's extremely difficult to pinpoint the actual cost because it requires a lot of information, a lot of variables that are in play. One, what type of buses they're going to use, how many buses they're going to use, the charge management, what time are they going to be charging these buses? A lot of this goes into the cost. We do not think that it's going to be prohibitive to move forward with, as we see, Los Angeles is moving forward, I think at a pace to meet 2030 goals. But we're happy to work with WMATA to figure out, how these costs are going to affect their operations. But at this point, we need a lot more information before we can figure out what the cost would be.
Was it your understanding before today that the cost of electrifying a garage would be roughly, I'm trying to think here, maybe 4 times the cost of, I forget what he said, a high-rise building? Was that a surprise to you?
That was a surprise to me. I can say capacity-wise in the district, we do feel as the short answer is that we do have the capacity to meet the goals of electrification. Generally, there are some specific instances with regards to WMATA. For example, I know there's one substation in Maryland that may require some upgrades for their Marinelli site. Other than that, we do think we have the infrastructure here in the district to make that happen. But there are a lot of factors to go into what the actual planning would be to see what the cost would be for WMATA. With that said, one of the things I mentioned in my testimony is that the Public Service Commission has required of us to introduce a plan to move forward with our goals to meeting the district's 2050 goals. We have a preliminary plan that we're going to be filing next week. And in that, we are meeting with WMATA and talking about this. It's going to be a big part of meeting our goals. So we'll be happy to share that with you. I've reached out to the staff, so I think we're going to get together and walk through that a bit. And that may provide a little bit more roadmap and some details on where we're going with this. But as of now, we just need a lot more information in order to pinpoint the exact costs.
Well, Mr. Montes testified, most metro divisions, I assume that's the same as like whatever it's called, the Northwest Division, which is off in Friendship Heights. Most metro divisions have about 3 to 5 megawatts of power available. However, to support Metro's ZE services, I think that means zero emission services, power will have to be increased to about 12 to 18 megawatts if there is no charge management. That's a kind of an important if. I mean, I have to say, I think he made it sound a little bit more complicated than it is. There has to be some thought here, but how does 12 to 18 megawatts compare with an office building downtown? Do you know?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I can follow up immediately after with that
If
answer.
you would.
Yeah, absolutely.
And does that require extraordinary infrastructure? Do you know, Mr. Pittman?
No. So I could tell you right now in the district, when we have new buildings go up all the time, different apartment buildings and office buildings, and we don't go out and build a new substation every time a building goes up. We firmly believe, particularly looking at our growth the last 30 years and projecting our growth moving forward, that we do have the capacity to meet this need. We have had internal conversations with, I know teams who have been working on this tirelessly, particularly with WMATA, and capacity has never been an issue for us. But I can get back with the team and confirm that in the email later.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I think these are important questions because I think this is part of the bureaucratic hesitation of moving toward electrification, is that this is going to require something extraordinary, even beyond your capacity. So you've made it clear that you have the capacity. And I actually looked at the report. The report that you filed in August was based on historical information over the last 50, 60, maybe it was 70 years. I think it went back to like 1950. And the growth in electric demand was, I'm going to say 4 or 5 times higher than it's been, maybe 6 times higher than it's been in recent years. And then there are other strategies, which you mentioned, energy efficiency, as well as shifting the demand. I forget what the term is for that. You referred to it a minute ago. So there are strategies. I think the more that PEPCO could do, if you could follow up to this hearing with something in writing that explains, the more that you could do that in layman's terms demystifies how complicated this is, or how difficult, or how extraordinarily costly it isn't.
Absolutely happy to do that, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, kind of, I think a takeaway from the Los Angeles operator, he wasn't an operator, he was a senior executive officer, was we're going to need substations and complicated software and this huge expense. And I think the more you can do to demystify that and speak to how it's accessible, it would be helpful.
Absolutely. No, I can't speak to the infrastructure part from the PEPCO side, the utility side. As far as the software, I may not have the expertise to go into that, but we will do our best we can to get you that information, sir.
Sure, and I don't know that I would expect you to have information on the software, except maybe you could tell us whether we're talking about something comparable to a DC government software initiative, which costs $200 million, or something that's more in the order of magnitude of maybe tens of thousands of dollars. Is there anything, Mr. Pittman, since you're representing the power company, is there anything that's inherently dangerous, extraordinarily dangerous? I want to emphasize extraordinarily with regard to EV infrastructure.
No, we've dealt with on the commercial side with regards to individual customers for quite some time, and we've have not had any challenges. We have charging stations and parking garages all over the city where individual customers can just pull up and use that. We anticipate that moving towards the electrification and zero emissions fleet of WMATA, there'll be a lot more safeguards in place, of course, for that sort of issue, but we haven't seen or experienced any challenges in that area.
Thank you. So let me turn to the two bus manufacturers, BYD and Nova Bus. I guess I would ask each of you in turn. I'm going to ask some questions about the price of the buses compared to diesel. If you can, life cycle maintenance costs, fuel or energy costs, and some issues like, what is it? There's a major rebuild, I think, with diesel buses. What's the deal with electric buses? I want to ask those kinds of questions. So maybe I'll start with BYD, if you can. How much more expensive is an EV bus? And do you have an estimate on what period of time before that cost is made up, assuming that it is made up through savings?
So currently, right now, one of our EV buses is roughly like $150,000 more than a diesel bus.
And is that increased price, that initial additional cost offset by lower maintenance costs?
One of the reports that we have out from Frederick, which currently had electric buses for about 2 years, and I can't get that report to you, they had a savings of over versus a diesel bus of $60,000 per bus a year, maintenance costs and fuel.
Well, has BYD done a broader study than just simply looking at a couple of buses in Frederick? I think you said it was just a handful of buses.
Yeah, so there's a report that's published in the Sierra Club that I think was submitted to you guys of a life cycle of an electric bus costing around, as far as the life cycle for fuel and maintenance, around $1 million, and for a diesel and Cng bus of being around $1,400,000.
So if you take the higher cost and the lower maintenance costs, one would save $400,000 over the life of a electric bus.
Yes, sir.
This is a study Sierra Club did in, I think, 2018 or 2019.
Yes, sir.
So your testimony is that you believe that their figures are accurate.
Well, the figures are changing every day with new technology with our batteries. We currently have a new blade technology out that's going to actually lower the cost of the batteries. It's going to lighten the load of the battery, and it's also going to add more kilowatts. So every day, as far as cost efficiency, the bus is going to come down in price, and so is the battery. The more buses that get ordered.
So let me see if I've got this clearly. Initial cost of a bus, one of your buses is higher than electric buses is higher than a diesel bus. That you, I'm going to say, don't disagree with the Sierra Club study that over the life of a bus, it's actually $400,000 less. And that with continuing technological developments, the savings will be even greater.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask Nova, do you agree, or would you have anything to add with regard to that point?
You can go, Benoit.
Sorry, I was on mute. So we agree that in principle, absolutely, maintenance costs of the buses will be reduced compared to a conventional bus. That's for us is very clear. Now the argument may be that we would need to be aligned in regards to the exact costs of these savings, because in there you need also to compare with savings on brakes, but you still have some increased costs on tires because you have higher regenerative braking. So there are some differences in regards to system usages, but in general, yes, we can say that there is a lot of interesting cost reductions in regards to maintenance. This can be offset by the replacement cost of the batteries. So that is why it's very important that the bus operators has a detailed review of the, I would say, the routes in incident service to ensure that the proper, I would say, sizing and energy power studies are correctly done in regards to battery life. You don't want to have a less costly battery that would be lifing out at 3 years, and after that having to recycle that battery to your 3 or 4 times within the life of the bus. So it comes with a complete, I would say, technical case to evaluate that. But yes, Mr. Chairman, generally the maintenance cost would be very lesser with the electrical bus.
I want to put that a bit more affirmatively. So would you agree that there's no question, but that looking at the life cycle of the bus, electric bus will be cheaper? That's initial price, operating, maintenance, all of that in total will be cheaper than the diesel or CNG bus?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as we see with the normal acquisition profiles, the acquisition cost of the electrical buses right now in the market is somewhat higher than what we see on conventional or CNG buses. But this cost can be gained back with the reduced maintenance costs.
Gain back, so it's cheaper.
The initial acquisition cost of the bus
Higher.
is higher, but in generally in the life cycle cost, taking into account the maintenance costs, it would generally be lower, but you still need to account for infrastructure costs that are part of the project.
Okay. The gentleman from Los Angeles Metro seemed to suggest that there was a cost to continuing improvements in technology. Can you speak to that? Do you remember he said that? Do you remember that he said that?
Yes, we can certainly speak to that. There is a cost, I would say, in regards to instability of the current technologies in regards to smart charging and different devices that are offered on the market right now. One of the main challenges we have in the industry with our customers and the charger manufacturers is that there is not a clear alignment in regards to communication, bus to charger communication, and also smart charging systems. For example, what Mr. Montes was alluding to initially is that what we're seeing is that there is multitude of software suppliers in regards to that are able to support smart charging efforts, but there is no standard way of doing that. So as WMATA may want to start implementing a charging system, it may very well be challenged by having multiple offers, but not having a standard way of implementing that. And as technology changes and charger devices changes, and also I would say communication, it's very technical communication protocols between buses and chargers, and standards do change. There can be a case where a bus or a system can get, I would say, into an obsolescence situation that will have to be revamped or overhauled in regards to different, I would say, interfacing technologies.
Well, listening to that makes me wonder why it wouldn't make sense for the bus acquisition manager at Metro to say, well, I'm not going to do anything for a couple of years until all this gets straightened out. But as a manufacturer wanting to sell your buses, I would assume you wouldn't like that answer. So what do you say to that person who's like, this is too complicated, I'm going to wait?
Well, what we do, R40 at Nova, and it's part of our Volvo, I would say, technical knowledge and scientific knowledge, is that we continuously improve into our systems, and we do offer a modular approach in regards to be able to forefront and also, I would say, plan out these changes. So at one point, we can do a changeover in the field, do some advanced planning in regards to different solutions that can be improved. So yes, at one point it can be, I would say maybe smart to plan ahead and have an operational budget to be able to plan out some improvements that will be done in the fleets in the future. For example, if you've got higher capacity batteries and you're up to a point that you need to change out your batteries, when these batteries need to be changed out on your vehicle, you may want to have an improvement program on your buses so you're able to put in the latest technologies for that. So this is why we're talking about the modular approach in regards to bus design and system designs.
Mr. Chairman, can I speak for a sec?
Yes, I was going to turn to you, please.
Okay, so BYD is a global company. We have just alone since 2009 have over 50,000 transit buses that have been in service. One of the one of the very nice goals with BYD is that our battery comes with a 12-year warranty. So a lot of your FTA funding, the bus comes with, the structure has to be warranted for 12 years or 500,000 miles. So our battery is going to meet that right from the beginning. As far as any new technology, it's going to be a firmware update, and our technology hasn't changed since 2009. The only thing that has changed just a little bit is the kilowatt that we're putting into our batteries. Now, one of our biggest goals that we didn't talk about, but when James is mentioning as far as the depots needing power, and it's been mentioned a couple times, the biggest factor is charge management. You're not going to pull in 50 buses and want all 50 buses to charge at once. Charge management is going to look at the bus and say, okay, this bus has, say 80% state of charge, and it's only going to give that bus a little bit of power. The bus beside it might be all the way down to 10%, and it's going to charge, it's going to throw more power at that bus. And that all has to do with charge management. And that keeps you from needing a crazy amount of power at a depot for, as far as charge management.
The guy from Los Angeles though made it sound like the charge management system is a little mysterious or complicated, or not fully developed, or a guy could easily be misled and not get the right system.
So we partner with a company called Amply. They have a turnkey solution. They meet up with Pepco. They find out how many buses you're going to get. They run, they work with energy companies to get the power there, and then they have a program that works right off your laptop, your cell phone. It shows you where your buses are at en route, shows you how much state of charge they have, shows you where they're at in the yard as far as how much power they need to charge to be ready for it to go out the next morning. So everything goes through that charge management program.
So as a manufacturer, would it be fair to say that if WMATA went to you, they should be working with you on a package, if you will? It's not just simply buying a bus, but also your assistance with directing them to charge management and other aspects to make this as easy as possible?
They do not have to go with a charge management company. They can just buy the chargers from us and have an electric company or a third-party contractor go hook them up. But with that being said, they will not have no charge management. They would literally have to go out and look at the bus and say, okay, this bus is 100% charged. You don't get that unless you get the charge management as far as your dashboard and in your depots, as far as your supervisors looking at your yard as far as what's ready to go out that next morning.
Mr. Wheeler, do you have data on how the life cycle costs compare electric versus diesel or CNG?
I can send that in my testimony, yes, sir.
And what about the fuel cost? I don't think I asked that already. The fuel obviously is electricity. Is it cheaper comparatively to diesel or CNG? Yes, so that all falls back into your charge management. If you get 10 buses in and you throw full power at them, you're going to be using, it's going to cost you more electricity than it is going to be for fuel. But if you go with a charge management where it balances out that, knowing that bus don't have to be out till the next morning, say 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, then you're getting a smart charge, and you can actually save money through the electric companies. I think we've sent you some comparisons of the electric rate and fuel savings and maintenance savings. I received something previously from you. It wasn't from you. I think it was from Mr. Yan regarding a study by, it was monthly performance indicators, I think from an agency in California, maybe. AV. Yes, sir. I think they currently have 50 buses running of BYDs, all electric transit buses.
and that would be Antelope Valley Transit Authority.
Yeah. Let me see. I asked you about how the fuel costs compare. Let me ask Nova the same question. Do you have data on comparisons, maintenance costs and the fuel costs?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Can you still hear me? I've got a problem
Yes.
with my device.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So yes, we can absolutely share data with you in regards to cost savings with compared to fuel, compared with diesel and CNG. We can certainly provide you some further data that we can share you on the separate communication.
Would you send that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be happy to do so.
So let me ask you, and then I'll ask Mr. Wheeler. Sometimes sellers help with access to funding opportunities. So do you know if there are funding opportunities, programs? I'm not talking about from you, the manufacturer, but other programs that can help governments acquire, electrify their bus fleets? Nova?
Yes, we absolutely have access to government funding programs in regards to acquisition. And we also have different access to, I would say, TIGR programs and R&D programs. If WMATA wants to develop new solutions, so we're definitely aligned for that. It would be, we'd be happy to support that. One of the big 4 days we're working on right now is to be improving, as we're talking with smart charging. As we discussed, it's I would say it's a challenge for the transit authorities to be able to manage correctly their fleets, large size fleets, and also being able to, I would say, prepare the vehicles for a very efficient dispatch. So that's one of the big challenges we see in the market right now, is having buses that are able to operate at the proper temperatures, proper HVAC systems without scavenging precious energy that would be used for propulsion. So that's one of our, I would say, our work activities to make sure that our customers are operating with the buses as efficient as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the access of we have for financing or TIGR programs and different solutions for that.
I think in the transit industry with buses, there are also a couple other measures like average miles between service interruptions and life cycle before major rebuild. Do you have comparative data on that?
Yes, we do. We have comparative data on that. What we can say is that depending on the platforms and depending on the geographic areas that the vehicles do operate, we're seeing that some type of buses that are built in regards to lesser stringent environments do suffer of reliability of some systems that maybe not be related to the powertrain themselves. For example, door systems, structures, windows, leakage, and all that. That's one point that needs to be considered when buying a bus, and new technology buses, is that the transit authorities need also to be sensible of, I would say, the experience of the different platforms that they do purchase, and making sure that all the other devices except the powertrain systems or batteries are also considered in the purchase, to make sure that, exactly as stating, Mr. Chairman, that the out of service statistics or performance data that you do manage are at least at par with the conventional bus fleets that you have. We've been seeing some interesting data with our own buses, whereas even our hybrids in the fleets are performing a lot better than previous conventional buses, because our own technologies are constantly progressing in regards to our own robustness and reliability. So that's one important point that needs to be considered when purchasing for a new fleet of buses.
I got a little bit lost there. So if I compare apples to apples, a bus with similar features, diesel and electric. And the only difference really in terms of quality is the electric is electric and the diesel is diesel. Is there an improvement with electric in terms of average miles between service interruptions and an improvement in terms of life cycle before rebuild?
Well, this is where it's important to take into account, I would say, the reliability of the systems that are on board. So if we're taking the same type of bus and we're taking, for example, our own LFS bus, we project a very high increase in reliability and a very interesting improvement in system reliability because you have less components to worry about on an electrical bus. But that being said, you need to ensure that your propulsion system has been correctly designed and validated, and you have all the experience needed to put in production that type of system. In theory, you have less components to worry about, of course, compared to a diesel bus, which has after treatment systems, you've got exhaust manifolds, you've got exhaust filters, you've got fuel systems to worry about, cooling systems that are in higher heat that you need to dissipate, and you have higher temperatures to your bus. So in principle, yes, you're going to have, I would say, a better base for reliability of your systems, but you need to ensure that your electrical components or your electrical powertrain system, be it batteries, battery management system, the powertrain system, is at least as reliable and have that experience in the field for that. So for example, what we've been dealing with at Nova is that we're designing our bus as a modular approach. So we're using the same driveline devices or electrical motors that we've been doing since almost 10 years now with our hybrids. So this, for example, takes out that reliability issue in regards to potential reliability with a new system. We're also having batteries that are manufactured as a Volvo specification, whereas we're basically using the same type of batteries for all of our Volvo partners, being Volvo Construction and Equipment, or Volvo Trucks. So we make an extra mile in making sure we've got that reliability and robustness. That is, I would say, the main item that needs to be taken care of, talking about reliability. After which, the base bus itself, if you're comparing one electrical bus to another electrical bus, what I was alluding to earlier, and that may have caused some confusion in my comments, is that you have also to make sure that your base bus system has been proven in the field. For example, door systems, pneumatic systems, braking systems, drive lines, steering systems, they have to be proven in really harsh environments that we typically see in North America. So that was pretty much my comment in regards to reliability.
Thank you. So Mr. Wheeler, do you want to address the same questions?
So, yeah, I mean, I think you started your question out on how or who can purchase. Is there other opportunities for funding out there? Is that correct?
I started by asking about funding.
Okay, so
buy a house, maybe the realtor helps me find a government program that will help me pay the cost. So that's what I'm asking here.
So there's low-no funds that are out there currently, which I know that you guys are currently using, and there's also VW funding, and BYD also has several investors that will purchase the buses, the infrastructure, the whole thing, and they will manage the fleet. So we do work with several different companies that do that as well. The second part of your question was reliability. I worked in maintenance for 18 years, working with starting with Detroit diesels, working up to Cummins diesels, and you can't compare an electric bus to a diesel bus as far as mean mileage between failures. You just got, I mean, electric bus basically is a big golf cart. You have a battery, you have an inverter, and you have traction motors. There's so many less moving parts that could possibly, go fail versus a diesel bus. So I think the reliability factor is way higher.
Well, is it too early in the life of electric buses in this country to have good data on comparisons? I mean, the average life of a diesel bus is, I forget what, 10, 15 years? I mean, that's the life cycle of it. There's a rebuild, if I remember, halfway through it. Is it too soon to have data with regard to electric buses and whether there needs to be a rebuild and what the total life cycle is?
So if it's purchased with federal money, it's got to be ran for 500,000 miles and it's got to be in service for 12 years, whichever one comes first. As far as a midlife, our batteries, like I stated, come with a 12-year warranty, so that covers that bus through the whole life cycle. And as far as our traction motors, they need maintenance because the electric motor is on the wheel. It's mounted right to the wheel. The traction motor is, and it needs to be maintenance at 250,000 miles, and that's basically just an oil change.
And that's it.
That's it.
So that sounds like it's easier and less expensive by far.
And one of the other advantages, like we experienced with hybrid buses, since you have regenerative braking, so when you come to a stop, it actually charges the batteries back up by using the traction motors. So your life cycle on your brakes go up to about 100,000 miles. We found when we stopped buying hybrid buses, it started and went back to just clean diesel buses. Her mileages went down to 30,000 miles. So that's how big of an improvement, using regenerative braking was.
But the operator, I shouldn't say operator, but the representative from Los Angeles, he talked about technology and obsolescence. So the batteries are getting better. If I have a battery, I buy a CNG, but not a CNG, I buy an electric bus today. I don't know where I would park it, but if I bought a electric bus today, am I going to find in 5 years that my battery is obsolete? Maybe warranted for 12 years, but.
So the way our company works is if your battery is failing, we're going to put in the latest and greatest technology. We're not going to be 6 years in and your battery go bad and give you old technology. You're only going to get new technology.
And that would just be part of.
It's just warranty.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the notes from Los Angeles. Technology with both buses and chargers continues to develop at a high rate, which leads to numerous challenges. The technology between the vehicles and chargers are developing at different rates, which means that there are sometimes compatibility issues between them. Can you speak to that?
So I think he's stating, because if I ain't mistaken, I just met with him about a month ago. They have a few of our competitors' buses, and they have different charge platforms. So one bus might charge with AC charging, and another bus might charge with DC charging. And integration, which he's speaking to, is he wants that to all work together. And currently that's what we're doing. We're making our chargers to where they work with everybody else's buses and vice versa.
So that's either not as big a problem, or it's easily overcome, or it is being resolved as manufacturers continue to develop.
They already kind of made it a standard, and it's already been resolved.
Give me just a second here. Let me turn to the two environmental witnesses, Mr. Nagan and Mr. Dressman. I kind of downplayed at the beginning the environmental benefits, but I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on that. Actually, I think maybe I'll start with this, and maybe I'll turn to Mr. Nagan first. I've heard the argument that electric buses really aren't cleaner because electric buses batteries require being charged by being hooked into the electrical system. So the energy source for generating the electricity that charges the bus is polluting. We haven't made any improvement. I keep looking for something and I'm not finding it. I think you know what I'm speaking to, Mr. Nagan. How would you respond to that?
Sure. I alluded to that in my presentation really quickly. One of my colleagues did a study, an analysis based on 2016 EPA power plant emission data. And he found that across the country, no matter where the electric buses would be getting their electricity from, they would still be cleaner when it comes to carbon emissions than fossil fuel buses. And I asked him to specifically look at our region, because our region it's right in the mid, it's right where 2 or 3 grid systems hit each other. So it's kind of a little complicated, but he took a look at the 2 or 3 grid systems, and he based on, like I said, 2016 EPA data, he calculated that you have to look at the life cycle cradle to grave life cycle carbon emissions, because as we all know, there are no tailpipes coming out of electric buses. But as you noted, wherever they get their electricity from someplace. So he looked at the makeup of the grid system that powers the Washington metropolitan area. And he looked at emissions from power plants that supply our area with electricity. And he calculated that even so, regardless of where the electricity was coming from for the electric buses, battery electric buses in our area would have a 70% lower life cycle carbon emission than diesel buses, 65% lower carbon emissions than natural gas buses, and 60% lower than diesel electrics. Now that was based on 2016 EPA data, but since then, over the last 5 years, our grid has gotten cleaner. More coal-fired power plants have been retired, more renewable energy online. And so he back of the envelope, he hasn't had a chance to redo his calculation, but back of the envelope is that makes electric buses at least 5% cleaner than they were based on 2016 data. So that argument is bogus. The argument that for whatever reason, Metro board member made this argument that it didn't really matter where you to switch to electric buses because they're not necessarily cleaner, but they're infinitely cleaner. The data shows. So that's a bogus argument.
So if I have an electric vehicle, I have 0 emissions coming out of the tailpipe. I don't even have a tailpipe.
Right, no tailpipe.
I do have the pollution that generated the electricity that's charging my vehicle. And let's just say that electricity was generated by coal. What you're saying is that the coal that generated that electricity is still less polluting than, we're talking about on a per vehicle basis, than if I had gasoline coming out of my tailpipe.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is that according to my colleague, who is an expert on this, that when you're talking about the carbon emissions that an electric bus is responsible for, because they don't emit it actually, as you just noted,
Yeah, but responsible.
From manufacturing the bus to the power that it gets from the power plants, it's still more than 50% cleaner. In fact, more than 60% or more cleaner than any fossil fuel bus that you're comparing it to when it comes to carbon emissions. And what will happen is over a period of time, when the grid gets cleaner and cleaner, which it will do because more and more coal-fired power plants are in line to be closed, that electric buses over their lifetime will get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Meanwhile, if you buy a diesel bus today or a diesel electric or a natural gas bus, they don't get any cleaner. They're still going to be emitting whatever they're emitting. So electric buses will get cleaner over time because the electricity they're getting is going to be getting cleaner. But right now, based on 2016 data, which is old, according to Union Concerned Scientist expert who did the crunching, number crunching, it's 60% to 70%, 75% cleaner to run an electric bus in our region when it comes to carbon emissions than any fossil fuel bus. And it's 100% cleaner when it comes to toxic pollution because there's no toxic pollution coming out of the bus.
And toxic includes particulates?
Particulates, nitrogen oxide, gases, or a whole range of things that cause disease and death. None of that stuff's coming out of an electric bus. So when it comes to traditional toxic pollution, I mean, one other thing, earlier you've been talking about comparing costs and talking about maintenance costs and if it's ever going to, over a period of time, the fact that electric buses are more expensive because they cost less to operate. As one gentleman just said, it's like running a large golf cart, you know, there's no moving part, very few moving parts that go bad. The other part of the equation is the money we're going to save on healthcare costs. That also means that at the same time, we want to electrify our bus system. We want to electrify privately owned passenger vehicles. And there's a whole range of things that we need to do in lockstep. Obviously, we're not just talking about, we're talking about, you know, WMATA and its bus fleet, but writ large, we're talking about electrifying or decarbonizing the entire transportation system. So we want to make sure that Metro is on the same trajectory as everybody else is instead of lagging behind. But the point is that you're going to have cost savings over a period of time when it comes to health impacts.
Yeah.
Which is hard, it's hard to quantify that. But like I said earlier, we've got the highest childhood asthma rate in the country compared to any other state. And we're nearly 40% higher than the average when it comes to asthma for adults and children. That's just one example. There are other health impacts that we've alluded to that will be ameliorated somewhat by cleaning up the not just Metro, but the entire transportation system. But to go back to your question, the point that some opponents of moving toward electrification have made, saying that electric buses are no cleaner when it comes to carbon emissions because of where they get their electricity, is a bogus argument. It's completely false.
Yeah, let me read this statement because I'm looking at, I guess it's a transcript from what was said at the Metro Board last year.
Oh.
Ultimately, the source of a lot of electricity in this region, in particular, if we're going to see significant expansion, is going to be natural gas. So to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to convert an electric bus. It will be running, to convert 2 electric buses, it will be running on electricity coming from natural gas, and then not necessarily invest in CNG buses. We've just changed who the users are of the same fuel source.
Yeah, that's just a bogus argument.
Let me I'll turn to Mr. Dressman, see if he wants anything that he wants to add or comment on any of the testimony so far. And then I'll probably close this out.
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely second everything that Mr. Nagan said. And he did make the point about the health savings. And I want to say that it is difficult to quantify, but some transit agencies have actually put forward studies that do attempt to quantify that. So the Chicago Transit Authority estimates that a single electric bus saves the city nearly $55,000 every year in avoided healthcare expenses resulting from cleaner air. A similar study conducted by Columbia University for the New York City Transportation Authority calculated that electric buses reduced particulate matter emissions by 97.5% when compared to diesel buses. And that produced a healthcare savings cost of approximately $150,000 per bus per year. So when we're thinking about the cost benefit of these buses, there's the environmental benefits that we've already talked about with the carbon emissions. I also, linking the study, I just sent an email to share the study that our friend from the Union of Concerned Scientists was referencing. So we have the environmental benefits, you have the maintenance cost saving benefits, and you also have the public health benefits from reduced particulate emissions. So it's important when thinking about the cost of these buses to also consider all benefits as well as the costs.
Thank you. And I did get a copy of your statement. So I don't know if you'd sent it earlier or you just sent it, but I do have it. And you're going to send us the report on funding or paying for buses.
Yes, the links to that report are in the statement.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me just, before I close this out, ask if any of the witnesses, anybody else, has anything else they want to say, Ms. Toussaint?
Yes, and thank you. I just want to add also another aspect regarding the environmental aspect is the fact that even once the battery is no longer, cannot be longer used for the buses, there's still something to do with those battery. So I think that the circularity is extremely important. We have to think about how those battery can be reused for different, not necessarily for transit, I mean, it can be used in many other situations, and also the recycling. So all the minerals that goes into the battery, they have a very high value. So it's really not like a standard battery that once you cannot use it anymore for your vehicle, it goes to the trash. It's really not the same thing for electric vehicle. And like Nova Bus, we are part of the Volvo group. That's why my colleague earlier referred to Volvo. And Volvo believes strongly in that and has created Volvo Energy, which aims really to address all those environmental aspects. So maybe this is something that we don't talk enough about, all the value of the battery, that once they reach the end of their life for the vehicle, what can be done with those battery? There's still economic value to the battery, and you can reuse it or recycle it.
Thank you. I appreciate your adding that. Any other final comments from anybody?
Yes, so just to back up what she was mentioning, after 12 years of in service with our batteries, we will, when that bus gets retired, we can literally take those batteries out and we can put them in energy storage, and they're good for 30 years. So it's not a matter that battery's done. It still has a lot of life left in it.
Interesting.
And with that being said, BYD is committed. If you guys want to do a pilot where you can run a couple of buses or 60 footers or 40 footers in DC and see if it makes sense down there, we have buses ready, and we're ready to commit to put them in there for you guys.
Okay. I don't think you want to put me behind the wheel. I wouldn't know how to. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. I want to thank each of you for taking the time out of your day to testify. This has been helpful. And let me just say to anybody who's watching that even though we limited the oral presentations to invited witnesses, anybody is welcome to submit comments, and statements can be submitted to us at COW, that's Committee of the Whole, COW@dccouncil.us, and the record will close at 5 p.m. on October 11th. Thank you again. The time is 3:22 in the afternoon, and this hearing around adjourned.